Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. This is Taliesin McKnight, and today's subject is the two pillars of Solomon, which are Jachin and Boaz. These are two pillars that have a deep meaning in Western Esoteric tradition. And today I'll talk a little bit about the great work. Now, the great work, which is the process of self-regeneration, is always symbolized by an androgynous figure, male and female, or by the union of opposites. In alchemical symbolism, you see a male-female symbol for the great work, which is the process of self-regeneration. Now, the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz, now the chemical androgyny is used in Rosicrucianism, okay? Now, the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz are two pillars that you will see in any lodge of Freemasonry. So in Freemasonry, you see the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz. Now, this is the tree of life, and this is a symbol, this is a sort of map of the psyche. This is a map of the psyche. It represents the forces of nature and also different parts of your own psyche. Okay, this is the tree of life, which is a central symbol of the Qabalah, which is Jewish mysticism. Now, on the tree of life, you have two opposite pillars. This is the pillar of severity, okay? And this is the pillar of mercy. This is Jachin and Boaz. These are two opposite pillars on the tree of life in the Qabalah, two opposite pillars in Freemasonry. These were two pillars that were on each side of the entranceway to King Solomon's temple. Okay. Now this represents opposites. You have masculine and feminine, male and female. Now, here in a moment, I'll talk about how this is used to accomplish the great work. I will talk about how this understanding of this law, supposedly a law, is actually applied. So in this video, I'll talk about the actual process of using this principle to obtain the great work, the secret process of regeneration. Isis will be unveiled, hopefully before our very eyes. So this represents opposites. You have male and female, hot and cold, light and dark, night and day. You'll notice you have day and night. You have male and female. Everywhere throughout nature you see masculine and feminine. You see in physics you have expansion and contraction. Okay? The sun gives energy and the moon receives it. Now, what is the nature of the active principle? It is to diffuse. The passive principle, its nature is to gather in and to fructify. Now, in sex, men project energy, and women gather that energy, and they work with that for the process of creation. In the Qabalah, Chokhmah is a burst of energy, and Binah gathers that energy and uses it to form the world of Yetzirah, which are the six Sephirot from Chesed down to Yesod. Now, in the Qabalah, so like I said, Jachin and Boaz, these represent hot and cold, light and dark, night and day, male and female, the sun and moon. You have growth and decay. Just like the moon grows and wanes, okay? Opposites, all opposites of nature. Now, in the Qabalah, the number 2 is represented by the letter Bet, the letter Bet. Now, the letter Bet is ascribed the number 2, and in Hebrew, Bet means house. Now, what is a house? A house is a receptacle, okay? A house is a receptacle, a container, a vessel. Just like the body could be seen as the house of the soul, or a temple could be seen as the house of God. Or you could say in sexual symbolism that the vagina is the house of the phallus. Just saying. So the letter Bet is given the number 2 and means house, which a house is a receptacle. Now the letter Bet is the first letter in Binah. It's the first letter of the word Binah, which Binah is the passive principle on the tree of life, and the letter Bet connects Keter and Binah. So it's significant that Bet connects Keter and Binah. Now, the letter Bet in the Qabalah is ascribed to the planet Mercury. It's one of the 7 double letters that are ascribed to the 7 planets. Okay, so the letter Bet is ascribed to Mercury. Mercury was the reconciler of opposites. Mercury was the messenger of the gods, and his symbol was the caduceus wand. The caduceus wand shows 2 serpents wound about a staff, and the 2 serpents represent opposites. Now, Mercury was a deity of commerce, commerce being the exchange of goods and money. Okay, commerce is an exchange of goods and money. Also of communication, which communication is an exchange of thought. And the 2 serpents on the wand of Hermes or Mercury was a symbol of reconciling opposites. So it's interesting that the letter Bet is the number 2, which is Binah, the passive principle, or the female principle, or the receptive principle, or contraction, or however you want to see it. And the letter Bet, like I said, the union of opposites, Mercury, the number 2, the duad. But the letter Bet is also the first letter in the word bara, create, creation, bara. And the first word of the Torah is Bereshit, in the beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'taretz. V'charetz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshek al pnei tehom. So, anyways, so it's interesting. Bet, creation, beginning. And in the tarot, the letter Bet is ascribed to the magician card. And the magician, which is really Mercury, in most decks, in some decks, shows him holding a wand upward and then pointing downwards. He is gathering energy from above and channeling that energy below. So you have above and below, male and female, hot and cold. Now, the cross, taking this to Rosicrucianism, I talked about the 2 pillars of Freemasonry. In Rosicrucianism, you have the rose cross. The rose is a symbol of the female principle, and the cross is a phallic or masculine principle. Okay? So the rose cross is, again, the hexagram. It is the union of opposites. Or you could say the cross and the circle. The cross represents the 4 points of the compass: northeast, southwest. The cross represents boundaries, the finite, things like that, boundaries. Whereas the circle is a symbol of infinity. It's a symbol of eternity. So the cross is the visible, physical, concrete, boundaries, finite, masculine, whereas the circle in symbolism is female, eternal, infinite. Okay? So the cross and circle, or the rose cross, either way you could see as a masculine female symbol. Now the cross is a square, if you think about it. 4 points. 4 in geometry is a square. A cross, 4 points, and then you have a square, kind of the same symbol. Now, the square or straight edge is a Masonic tool used to draw out a square, a straight point, concrete. Now, the compass is used to make a circle. So with the square and compass, you have the square is the cross, its boundaries. The compass is a circle. So again, you see a symbol for the finite and the infinite, time and eternity, male and female. So these are all opposites. Now, I am not a Mason, okay? And I'm not telling you anything secret. All I'm doing is talking about basic symbolism of the square and compass and the 2 pillars in the Qabalah, which happen to have the same name. So I'm not really revealing anything. I'm just talking about basic symbolism. So anyways, now and in a moment I will get to the actual process of how this is used to create the great work, which in my opinion has to do with reintegrating repressed aspects of the psyche and things like that. But anyways, going a little further with this, the cross and circle is one of the oldest symbols known to man. And this is often referred to as a sun wheel. The cross and circle, the sun wheel. Now, the circle represents cycles, and the cross, the 4 points, represent the cycle of the seasons. So this is the solstices and equinoxes. You have spring, summer, fall, and winter. Or in the day, you could say sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, the darkest day. So the 4 points, these represent different cycles. Now you'll notice that 4 is really 2 because you have night and day. Okay? The sun rises, 1 point. It's at noon, it's here, but these are both daytime. Sunset and midnight are 2 points, but this is nighttime. So 2 is really 4. Or in the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. This is really the interplay of 2 forces, which is the principles of hot and cold, the principles of light and darkness. So spring, it gets a little warmer. Summer, it's hot. In the fall, it gets a little cooler. In the winter, it gets, very cold in the northern hemisphere. So, even though it's 4, you really see this as 2. It is 2 extreme points, the solstices of the winter and summer solstice, and the equinoxes. Equi means equal. So you have 2 extremes and the middle point, which this is the triangle of Solomon. It is 2 extremes and the equilibrium between these. So this all goes to how the 4 is reconciled as 2, which is revealed as 3, which takes us back to Oedipus Rex, who solved the riddle of the Sphinx. The riddle of the Sphinx is, what creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 at night? Now Oedipus Rex, said man, because as a child, as a baby, we crawl on 4 legs. In adulthood, we walk on 2. And in old age, we walk on 3 legs because we have a crutch. So, what creature walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, and 3 in the sunset? However, I think there may be a deeper symbol here. The certain process, a secret process. I don't want to go fully into this, but it has to do with 4 reconciled as really 2 and reconciled as 3. Okay? Now in astrology, you have 4 elements. and 3 different ways these manifest. Mutable is when it's about to change into a new season. Cardinal signs begin a season. Mutable signs end a season. And the fixed signs of the zodiac fall in the middle of the season. Okay? So, for example, Capricorn begins winter. Aquarius is the midway, it's the fixed sign, straight up winter. And then the mutable sign Pisces ends winter. So these 3 principles of fixed, cardinal, and mutable have to do with the 3 and the 4. 3 times 4 is 12. Okay? So anyways, now in alchemy and Rosicrucianism, you had salt and sulfur, which are opposites, which are reconciled by Mercury. In the Qabalah, you have 3 mother letters, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Mem is the passive principle, Shin is the active, and Aleph is the reconciler between the 2. Of course, the Hebrew letter Aleph is a Vav with a Yud on each side, so that's interesting. Now, I'm getting a little bit off topic. The sun wheel has to do with going how the square rotates, creating a circle. This is going through the different cycles of nature. The process of the sun, the path of the sun. Who was it that lived to be 365 years old again? The sun wheel has to do with going through the seasons, okay? Now, the Ouroboros, this is one of the oldest symbols known to man. I personally saw this in the Book of Gates, which was an Egyptian text dating back to the 18th dynasty of Egypt, which describes the sun god Ra and his descent into the underworld, okay, in his boat. This goes back to the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, I know. This is thousands of years old. It is a mystery symbol. Now, the Ouroboros has a serpent with its tail in its mouth. Of course, the circle is a symbol of continuity and eternity. This is a symbol of recurrent cycles. Of course, its end is in its beginning. Death comes right before life and death. Okay, now some people see this as a symbol of karma, eating his own tail. What goes around comes around. But this also has to do with recurrent cycles of nature, such as the phases of the moon, the rising, setting of the sun, the seasons. Now, notice that the tail in its mouth, it is sexual in a sense, because you have a phallus inside that, okay? Now, with its tail in its mouth and the serpent turning, the Ouroboros, one of the oldest symbols that I've ever seen. In turning, it both chases and flees from itself. It is both running away from and pursuing. So that's interesting. And of course, in the hexagram, another one of the oldest symbols known to man, it's found in different cultures, thousands of years old, shows an upward pointed triangle, which is the masculine principle, a phallus, and the downward pointing triangle, which is a cup or receptacle, a womb. So masculine and feminine, and these unite, or you could say above and below, hot and cold, light and dark. Now, how is this actually applied? What is the actual process? If we come to understand that you have expansion and contraction, male and female, growth and decay, we understand how is this applied for self-regeneration, to obtain wholeness. Carl Jung talked about how we have repressed and suppressed aspects of our own psyche. Okay? So we have this self that we show to the world. And then we have those aspects of our psyche that we repress, we hold down. So we have the persona, the self that we show to the world and we acknowledge in ourselves. And then we have the opposite parts of ourselves that we repress. For example, Carl Jung said that all men have a feminine side. all men have a feminine side, and all women have an inner masculine, okay? So that's an example that men have a feminine side, women have a masculine, but usually this is repressed, okay? The masculine side of someone is called their animus in Jungian terminology. The anima is the feminine side. Now, in people that are homosexual, they may be balanced, but also sometimes it can go the opposite reverse. So a very manly woman could say to have a repressed anima and a very strong animus, masculine. A very effeminate man could also be said to have the opposite extreme. A very strong anima, feminine side, and a very weak animus, masculine side. So this applies whatever the case may be. We have a repressed gender, Jung said. Another way to look at this is someone that is really ambitious and driven. They have this lazier side to them they're repressing. Someone that's really sensitive has a harsher side to them. It's just repressed. People that are real tough and strong, like if they're in the Marine Corps or something, they have the sensitive side. It's just repressed. So whatever you show to the world, whatever you acknowledge in yourself, there is an opposite that is repressed, much like a shadow. We all have a shadow, okay? I don't know if I can make a shadow on the wall. That's easy to remember. You can't forget this if you just remember your own shadow. It's all that is repressed, okay? We also have repressed sexual desires. We all have repressed fears and phobias. So we have repressed memories. So part of this is bringing this material to the surface and reintegrating those unconscious part of ourselves into the conscious self. So this is reintegrating repressed aspects of our own psyche. Okay? Now Carl Jung came up with all of this, but this looks a lot like the Rosicrucian and alchemical symbolism of the androgyny, the chemical androgyny, the chemical marriage of Christian Rosenkreuz. Again, rose cross, male, female, opposites. So that's interesting, okay? So it's interesting that Carl Jung's ideas seem to look a little bit like alchemy. So, reintegrating repressed aspects of our psyche. Now, I would like to get into the chariot allegory of the soul. The chariot allegory was an allegory of the Greek philosopher Plato. Plato, who supposedly studied under Socrates. Plato had the chariot allegory of the soul. This is 2,500 years ago. It shows a charioteer, which represents our psyche, the soul. The charioteer, which has a white horse and a black horse. So a charioteer with a white and black horse. The black horse represents our passions, our cravings. The white horse represents the moral impulse. This is our thumos, okay? And so we have our passions and then our moral impulse. And the charioteer tries to control these forces and get them to work together. Now this is 2,400 years ago. This looks very much like Sigmund Freud's concept of the id and the superego. Sigmund Freud had the id, which is our cravings, just our impulses, our desires, our cravings. And the superego is our moralizing impulse. So our id may say, oh, I'm hungry. I'm just going to take the food off that person's plate. And your superego would say, no, don't do that. That would not be proper. It would be rude. So this is our own inner struggle with ourselves. The devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. To put it that way. The id and superego. It's interesting that with the foundations of modern psychology, 2,500 years ago, someone said the same thing. So Carl Jung talks about things we see in the Middle Ages with alchemy. Sigmund Freud, you see some things that seem to go back 2,500 years to Plato's chariot allegory of the soul. So we have a charioteer with a white horse and a black horse. Now, it's interesting that in the tarot, in most tarot decks, it shows a charioteer with a white horse and a black horse. So wait a minute, the chariot card in most tarot decks has a charioteer with a white and black horse. It's interesting that this seems to be taken from Plato's chariot allegory of the soul. So anyways, we're trying to scour ancient temples. We're trying to delve into the secret doctrine of the mystery schools. Now, the mystery schools obviously did not write things down, but they left us their symbols. Here's a mystery cult, the cult of Mithras, Mithraism. The cult of Mithras was a sort of Freemasonry that existed in the Roman Empire about 2,000 years ago. The cult of Mithras was an organization of men only. It was secret. They had lodges, sort of, called Mithraea, underground crypts. They gave their initiations. They had 7 degrees of initiation. So the cult of Mithras was a type of Roman Freemasonry, okay, around 2,000 years ago. Now, the main symbol for the secret society of Mithraism was called the Tauroctony. The Tauroctony shows Mithras slaying a bull. Now you could say maybe this represents us mastering our lower self, okay? Mastering your lower self. Possibly conquering our own bestial nature, maybe. Now on each side of Mithras, slaying his own bestial nature, these are 2 torch bearers. Torch bearers. They're light bearers. You have Kautis and Kautopatis. One torch bearer holds a torch up, and the other torch bearer on the other side holds the torch down. Very much like a Jachin and Boaz. Interesting. The one holding the torch up is the rising sun, day. The one holding the torch down is the setting sun, night. So you have day and night, rising and setting, going up and coming down. Birth, sunrise, and death, sunset. Life and death. Hot, the day's hot, night is cold, okay? Going up and down. So opposites. So he has opposites taming his own bestial nature. Interesting, okay? So part of this has to do with bringing our own repressed feminine or masculine, our own repressed urges, all the stuff that is repressed, bringing it to the surface. Part of this even includes our dark side, okay? This does not mean to just reach wholeness and go wild with whatever impulse. It is getting the horses to work together and mastering them. The chariot card, the chariot allegory of the soul, looking a lot like Sigmund Freud. This is the process psychologically of human regeneration, the secret process of self-transformation and alchemical turning of lead into gold. The great work which is always symbolized by a chemical androgyny, a male-female figure. So bringing repressed material to the surface and reaching wholeness, but also mastering, getting the two horses or two opposites to work together and integrate, but then mastering them. Okay, notice the chariot allegory. The charioteer is controlling both forces and getting them to work together. Many people are familiar with the caduceus wand of Hermes, the serpent, the wand with two serpents wound about it. Usually above the staff are two wings. Wings represent transcendence, rising above dual forces. Many people are familiar with the image of the Virgin Mary stepping on the head of the serpent, or the Virgin bruising the head of the serpent. You see this in a lot of statues, okay? You could say that maybe, possibly, this represents intelligence which should always rise above blind forces. The charioteer controls the two horses. The Virgin bruises the head of the serpent. Intelligence rising above blind force, rising above the instinctual forces of nature. He has the two torchbearers, Jachin and Boaz, and yet he subdues his own lower nature. This is not a symbol of just wholeness. This is a symbol of self-mastery. Okay? An adept is one that gains mastery through work. What is the creature that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, 3 at evening? It is man. Wholeness, reintegrating unconscious forces and mastering those forces. The charioteer controlling the two horses. The Virgin bruising the head of the serpent. The Tauroctony slaying the bull with the two opposites. The wings above the caduceus wand transcending opposing forces. Now, one more thing I wanted to talk about. So that's how it's applied. Reintegration and mastering them. You don't just reintegrate, you also subdue and control those forces. Now, what letter connects Chokhmah and Binah on the Tree of Life? It's the letter Dalet, which means door. And this is the Empress card, ascribed to Venus, uniting Chokhmah and Binah, the two halves of the tree. And on the Tree of Life, of course, if you add up the Sephirot on the middle pillar, 1 plus 6, which is Tiferet, is 7, plus 9, which is Yesod, is 16, plus 10, Malkut. So adding up the Sephirot on the middle pillar, between the two, equals 26, which is Tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He. Of course, Yud He Vav He has masculine and feminine symbolism. Now, the monad represents sublime unity. There are no differences in Ein Sof. Ein Sof has no contrast. Although it is colorless, all colors spring from it. So, it has no contrast. If everything was just white, you couldn't see anything. Now, if you had opposites, the idea of unity and the concept of unity immediately gives us the idea of contending forces. Motion and life consist in the tension of contending forces. Anyways, monad is unity. There are no differences. The duad is opposites, contrast. This takes us from unity to separation, division, this versus that, okay? Now, thus, the duad comes from unity. Thus, you could say in Kabbalistic symbolism, Eve issues from the side of Adam. Now, Adam was male-female. But this is separation. From the one comes two. So that's interesting, just like creation is the revelation and unfoldment of the Godhead in the Qabalah. Now, in Tsimtsum and Lurianic Qabalah, which came up in the 15th century, Isaac Luria in Safed. Anyways, Lurianic Qabalah talks about Tsimtsum, which is the withdrawal for a place to create, and then sending the Kav, the ray. So again, the active principle is that which diffuses. The passive is that which gathers in and fructifies. Okay? So also in Chinese medicine, they have yin and yang. Yin, yang, male, female, hot, cold, being and not being. The visible and invisible, above and below, and the interaction of above and below, which has the secret process of creation, which is the triangle of Solomon. Interesting that in evocations, the triangle is for manifesting. Maybe there's a deeper mystery there. Maybe it's just me. But anyways, Eastern teachings, you have yin and yang. Now, in Chinese medicine, they believe that there are two opposing currents of energy in the body. So you have two opposing currents of energy in the body in Chinese medicine. And through acupuncture, through eating certain foods and Chinese medicine, you balance the currents of energies in the body, which creates healing. Just like balancing the two forces of the psyche creates self-transformation and the secret process of regeneration. In yoga, the caduceus wand, the staff with two serpents wound about it, the staff represents the spinal column, called the Sushumna in yoga, and the two serpents are Ida and Pingala, two opposing currents of energy in the body. Now, I'm not that big into Eastern stuff, but I know just a little bit. I'm mostly Western stuff. So two opposing currents of energy in the body in Chinese medicine. Two opposing currents of energy in yoga. Most Americans, most Westerners in Europe, they practice yoga positions, but they don't even realize the deeper mystical things. Of course, that's okay, because they don't care. So two opposing currents of energy in Chinese medicine, two opposing currents of energy in yoga. Now, the tree of life represents the human body. The 10 spheres, or sephirot, represent 10 points of energy in the body, and the 22 paths represent currents of energy in the body. So taking this to be a map of the human body, as well as of the psyche and the forces of nature, you have two opposing pillars, Jachin and Boaz, two opposing currents of energy in the body. So that's interesting. The two pillars of the self, two opposing forces in yourself. So anyways, we know that we have opposing forces. This is about reintegration. This is the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, of course, Rose Cross, male and female, reintegration of unconscious material, and self-mastery. This is Mithras killing the bull in between the 2 points. This is the initiate being bound in between the 2 pillars. This is the wings of transcendence rising above the 2 serpents on the caduceus wand symbol. This is the Virgin bruising the head of the serpent. This is one leans on that which resists. So, we know we're trying to uncover the veil of Isis. We're trying to discover the secret doctrine which has trickled down to us through alchemy, tarot. So anyways, it's about reintegration and about self-mastery. Anyways, thank you for joining me. Once again, this is Taliesin McKnight, and in an upcoming video, I will talk about the Triangle of Solomon. Anyways, looking forward to it. Have a great day, y'all.